Hey y'all, thank you so much for tuning in to Heart with Latrice Sampson Richards. I am Latrice Sampson Richards. I'm a mental and emotional wellness creative, and I'm super excited to be here with y'all today for the second installation of the show, which is real talk about what it takes to exist in healthy relationships. Today's topic is how to keep your parents out of your relationships. We all crave the love and support that comes from a parent who truly loves us. But as millennials across the age spectrum are beginning to realize, there is a thin line between support and overreach. And if your parents are anything like mine, they have crossed that line several times. So I was catching up on some episodes of Black Married Fly podcast. Shout out to Candace and Trev. And Trev was talking about altercation that he had with his mother around her not respecting his boundaries and his decisions as an adult. And when he said that, I was like, oh my God, it's not just me. It's kind of like the light bulb went off for me. And I realized that it's not just me. I mean, I literally just had this conversation with my parents last week. The exact same conversation that Trev is talking about. And I realized that a lot of us are struggling with this. And so today, I want to give y'all 3 tips on how to keep your parents out of your relationship. For those of you who may be watching who for whatever reason do not have a relationship with your parent or have a strained relationship with your parent, please know that this episode might be a little triggering for you. If you begin to feel any anxiety or anger or frustration as you listen to this, go ahead and stop it and take a moment to calm yourself down and come back to it when you're in a better emotional space. Because you do need to address those feelings, but you cannot do that when you're in a dangerously emotional space, okay? Emotion and logic do not go well together, and so you have to make sure that you address one so that you can utilize the other. The first step in keeping your parents out of your relationships is to establish boundaries for yourself. Now, for those of you who followed me for any real period of time, you know that there is a difference between expectations and boundaries, but that difference is very minute. It's kind of like 2 sides of the same coin, right? So in order to establish your boundaries, you have to first understand what your expectations are. Expectations are for you. Boundaries are for the outside world. What is your expectation for a parent as it relates to your relationship? Do you expect them to call and check in? Do you expect them to volunteer to take care of the kids? Do you expect them to only offer support when you need that support or when you're asking for that support? In what areas are they allowed to provide feedback or input? In what ways are you willing to receive that feedback or input? What areas are completely off limits when it comes to your relationship? Do you feel comfortable with letting your parents into your bedroom in terms of talking about the things that are going on in your relationship? Or do you prefer to just keep it on a peripheral? You have to really understand for yourself what it is that you are and are not willing to accept, because you cannot expect them as your parents to respect your boundaries if you're not clear about what those are. The second step is to then communicate those boundaries. So once you've established how you want to be treated, how you want your parents to interact with your relationship or with you and your choices and decisions that you make, you then have a responsibility to communicate those boundaries to them. This can get a little tricky sometimes because some of us, I mean, you know, I'm from the deep South, and so being from the South, it's not necessarily acceptable to have certain types of conversations with your parents. And boundary setting conversations is one of those things. We come from a place where children are to be seen and not heard, and that doesn't necessarily change because you have degrees and got married and have kids of your own. They still see you as their child. But the reality is that you are a grown person. Okay, you are a grown adult and you are capable of making your own decisions, and they have to respect that. So there is a right and wrong way to communicate your boundaries. And basically, the wrong way is whatever way that's going to lead to an argument, anger, and frustration. Now, the right way is going to vary depending on who you are as a person and also who your parents are. But it also matters the relationship that you have with your parents. If you have a strained relationship already, then you might want to approach the topic from a gentler kind of place. You don't want to make it a bigger situation than what either of you can handle, because at that point nobody is listening to anybody, and it's it doesn't really make a difference. All right, so as you're communicating, you definitely want to communicate appreciation if you feel like it is warranted, in terms of appreciating the fact that your parents give a shit about what's going on with you in your life. That's not a bad thing, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people who wish that their parents gave more of a shit of what was going on for them in their lives. So express some appreciation for the fact that they are concerned, for the fact that they do have your best interests at heart. But then also be clear about the fact that while you appreciate their input, you also need them to respect your boundaries and your decision-making capabilities. Okay. It's best to try to have this conversation face to face, but if it's an extremely emotional situation, you might want to maybe create a little bit of distance between yourselves and maybe do a phone call or a text message instead. I definitely would opt for the phone call first if that's an option, or like a video message, or FaceTime or something like that, if that's an option, because it's more personable and it won't feel so cold. Okay, but if you absolutely have to send a text or an email, then do it that way. What really matters here is that you actually make the effort to communicate, and that you create an environment that allows them to really be able to focus on what it is you're trying to say. And then the third tip today, and final tip, is to enforce your boundaries. Now you've established the boundaries, you have communicated the boundaries, and now you have to give them an opportunity to work within the boundaries that you've set. Now when you do this understanding that they may not get it right the first few times. You have to give them some time to adjust to the new boundaries that you've set. Now, unless the boundary that you've set is a hard and fast boundary, meaning this has to change immediately, either you're being extremely or wildly disrespectful to myself or my spouse, or you're putting me at risk, my job at risk, like something like that, that's like a significant overreach that needs to stop immediately, then you set that boundary and you make sure that you communicate this has to stop now. But for the most part, you're gonna have to give them some time to adjust to your new boundaries, okay? Which means that you have to be willing to reinforce those boundaries multiple times. You will have to repeat yourself. Do it. So many of us, we get so wrapped up in this idea of, well, I shouldn't have to say it more than one time. Yes, you do. This is how human beings learn, okay? Especially when you're trying to change years and possibly decades of behavior. You have to reinforce that boundary as many times as necessary. Now, at a certain point, either they're going to get it and you'll start to see those changes, or you will begin to notice that there's no effort even being made, okay? If you see that there's no effort being made whatsoever to respect your boundaries, then you either communicate those boundaries again in the form of a focused conversation again, or at that point you have to make a decision about the relationship you have with your parents and how you want to move forward with that relationship, okay? And it's it's a sucky thing to have to say. Nobody wants to think about it in that way, but that's just the reality. Not everybody's parents are going to get on board with the establishing of these boundaries. And if you know that your parent is one of those parents and you find yourself in that position, as much as it sucks, you have to deal with the situation. All right, so that's your 3 tips on how to keep your parents out of your relationship. You want to establish boundaries, Communicate those boundaries and enforce those boundaries as often as possible, okay? If you're struggling to establish boundaries around your relationship with your parents, I'd love to help you get through that. You can shoot me an email at support@latricesampsonrichards.com, or you can fill out the form right below to sign up for a heart-to-heart session. Remember, Black Married Fly listeners get a very special discount if you use the link below. That's all I got for y'all today. I love y'all and I appreciate y'all. And until next time, be well. Bye, y'all.